Hi, I'm Time Correspondent Justin Worland, and I'm thrilled to be joined here today with Governor Jay Inslee of Washington. Governor Inslee, thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for help spread the gospel. We appreciate your work.
Yeah, well, I want to start just by asking, there's been a lot of talk about COVID, this moment, this pandemic as an opportunity to build back better, to re-envision our future with climate change in mind. And I just wanted to ask, on the ground, working in a state where obviously there's a revenue shortfall, like so many states, how do you implement that better future given this shortfall and these challenges?
Well, if I can, the easy answer to that is to continue to do the things we were doing before COVID showed up, which is to continue to embrace the policies that are going to grow clean energy jobs, put people to work developing electric cars and solar energy and wind power and energy efficiency and building efficiency, and to continue on the course we were on, creating 100% clean electrical grid as we are in our state, and good energy efficiency standards as we are in our state, to improve our transportation sector, to decarbonize the transportation sector. The simple answer to that important question is to continue on that path. But I think there's a symmetry between, if I may, what has happened in our lives writ large because of the COVID and because of the climate crisis, that it has given us a moment to maybe reflect on that which is really important to us in our personal lives, which in a way, I think the COVID experience, if there's any bright spot, has got us in touch with the things that are really, really important, which is our loved ones and our own health, and the things that are more important than some of the trinkets we buy, frankly, on occasion. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think the COVID and the climate crises can be, to inspire us to address both, have something in similar, which is that when we're in touch with our deepest values, we will be inspired and motivated to act. And we need to do that, obviously, on climate as quickly as possible. And so I come out of the COVID, as we will, better days are ahead. The vaccine is an incredibly powerful tool. We're so excited about the genius that has brought this to our plate. After that becomes subdued, I believe we will be able to accelerate our economy dramatically, doing the things to defeat climate that President-elect Joe Biden is promoting, that I'm promoting in my state, and other governors are as well. So I'm an optimist even in these dark moments, and that's what the holiday spirit is about. Bring a little light in a dark day.
Right. Well, states have played a critical role on the international stage, signaling to other countries that the U.S. is still engaged, even if at the federal level, the U.S. has been absent for the last 4 years. And I'm just curious, what do you think the role for states should be going forward? I hear from a lot of people around the world that they still expect states to be acting and supporting the federal government. What is the role for states on the international stage? How do you signal that the U.S. is working on these issues?
Well, I think states will have even an increasing role to help the international community for a variety of reasons. One, we have more skins on the barn wall to show of success. Every year we have more success in our states to be able to share with the rest of the world, to demonstrate that America is in the game and is making progress. And our states are making, particularly those led by Democratic governors, tremendous progress in creating clean energy jobs. And every time we have a success in our state to share with the rest of the world, that both inspires them for greater efforts and assures them they won't be alone when they act. So we will have an increasingly important role, number one. Number two, we do have to recognize a reality that even though we have a tremendous president-elect, and by the way, I could not be more delighted on what President-elect Biden is proposing on climate. It is robust, it is ambitious, it is comprehensive, and he has demonstrated that he is viscerally committed to climate work. And I could not be more delighted about where we are in the White House in a few weeks. But we have to realize that there will be challenges in the U.S. Senate We hope to win some Senate seats in Georgia, so we will have some climate advocates coming out of Georgia, and that the president-elect will have a majority to work with in the Senate. But even if that were to happen, there are still no slam dunks because of the filibuster in the Senate. So there's still going to be huge room to run, where we will need to run to be even perhaps more ambitious than the Senate will allow us to be on a federal level. And that's why states will need to be aggressive and ambitious and will need to play a role. Third thing I'll say is I think there is a role where we can play a role. I talked to the Environmental and Energy Minister of Denmark this morning about this subject, about how what are called the subnationals. Those are, states, cities, counties. We actually think of ourselves as supranationals, not subnationals. But in any event, we want them, us to play a role at the next international conference next fall, the COP in Glasgow. And I think there is a role we can play there. And I'll be talking to my colleagues about that. So one, we got a great story to tell. Two, we're going to need to do more work than the federal government will be able to do, even under President Biden's leadership. And three, we're eager to do so. So I'm excited about how we can play a role worldwide.
Right. Well, of course, as you alluded to, underpinning any sort of international involvement is the work that you're doing at home. And I'm curious, I know you have a net zero by 2050 target, as well as I believe 45% by 2030 reduction goal. And so I just wanted to ask, what do you need to do to ramp up to meet those targets, particularly in the next couple of years to meet the 2030 target?
Right. Well, I reiterate, these are not just targets. These are binding, concrete, enforceable ceilings on carbon emissions. So they're much more than targets. And that's important because sometimes we can be lulled into a false sense of security if some political leader says, I have a target. Well, you need a lot more than a target. You need an enforceable mechanism. And we have enforceable mechanisms to actually make this happen. So that's a big deal. We have the best 100% clean electrical grid bill in the nation in my state. It's something we're proud of. We also have the best, and these are enforceable energy efficiency standards for our buildings that are the most ambitious energy efficiency building standards that are enforceable in the United States. So we've come a long ways, but, and here's the good news, we have more work to do in our state, even though we've done well. We have to be more ambitious in our transportation decarbonization efforts in our transportation sector. So this year, I'm working for a low carbon fuel standard and additional ways to decarbonize our transportation sector. And so we've got some more work to do in our state, and that's absolutely necessary because 40% of our emissions are from our transportation sector. And other states are, and other countries are ahead of us. We don't like other countries to be ahead of us. Denmark's essentially moving to, non-internal combustion engines after 2030. The technology is being so rapid. Look, I saw the first commercial for an electric Hummer a couple of weeks ago. When they're building electric Hummers that the sky's the limit on decarbonizing transportation. Right,
absolutely. Well, I want to go back to something you alluded to earlier, which is what's happening at the federal level. You spent 2 decades in Congress. What do you, and of course the politics are very different now, even from, 8 years ago, but what could you reasonably expect to see out of Congress on climate, given this political climate and divide, particularly on the Hill?
Well, I always like to answer questions like that, which is we reasonably expect Congress to act in the best interest of the American people. That should be our expectation. And if we have that expectation, it means that they will adopt both regulatory and other mechanisms to reduce carbon in multiple sectors of our economy. And we know those systems work. They're working in multiple states. We ought to do it on a national basis, and we should have that expectation. Now, what happens in these Georgia Senate races, that will make it easier to realize those expectations. A perhaps easier thing to acquire is to make the investments in the federal government, which will make investments in the deployment of existing technologies, that will make investments in research and development of new technologies, that will make investments in rebuilding our infrastructure so that it doesn't waste so much energy, both in our public and our private infrastructure. That actually, I think, has an easier route through the Congress on a non-regulatory basis, where we can make investments to put people to work, which we desperately need, obviously, coming out of this COVID dip in our economy. We need big time investment. And there's no better investment than you can make right now than in a clean energy job, for a lot of reasons. One, clean energy jobs are growing 3 times faster than the rest of the industrial sector of the United States. Number 2, these are jobs accessible to everybody. These aren't jobs not just for electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. These are jobs for carpenters and iron workers and machinists and advanced manufacturing folks. We need to build our way out of this. These are people who build. And so this is the most rapid way to put people to work coming out of the COVID crisis, which also is the most important place to build both efficiency, that's something you can do in 30 days, right? When you rebuild a building so you don't waste energy, that's a 30-day project. It's not a 30-year project. And so it has very instant returns, and it gets people working, and we know it has a long-term necessity. So I think there's a symmetry between both the necessity economically and the possibility of helping us rebuild our economy after we come out of the COVID shadow, which we will. So in answer to your question, we ought to have high expectations. We ought to be demanding of our public officials, and we should not take no for an answer. Look, that not taking no for an answer is important in this business. You know, when I came in here, the Republican Party said no, no, no 50 times. And I said yes 51 times. And now we've got some great work we've done. So we got to keep that spirit alive. And again, we've got the makings of tipping points in this nation. And we have the makings of a tipping point because Americans are now seeing with their own eyes the devastation of climate change. This is no longer a graph on a chart. It is no longer parts per million. It's seeing the West Coast United States burn down, and the South Central seeing hurricanes every Tuesday, and Miami Beach underwater. So, and the Midwest, farms being destroyed. So when you reach a tipping point like that, the politics of the situations can change very, very rapidly. And we've seen this in the last couple decades. Marriage equality, healthcare, things can tip very quickly. And I think we're approaching that point. So we ought to be very aggressive in demanding our approach.
Well, this is the question that I have to ask, the due diligence question as a journalist. Are you interested in joining the administration in some capacity? I mean, is that something that you've talked about or would be interested in?
Well, I think I can help the administration right here with getting Washington to push the ball as hard as we can, and that's what we're doing. And I love my state, and that's my intention, to keep pushing the ball right here in the state of Washington.
When you think about the federal government and the ability of states, how do you think about the where the most impact can be had? What are your thoughts on that, on those two buckets? Yourself aside, and potential federal position aside.
I don't know how to answer that question except to just kind of fall back on, the old saying: do the most you can, the best you can, the fastest you can, where you are and what you have available to you. And so that's what all of us have to do. I would say that I read a letter to the editor. It was from like a 16-year-old high school student. It was in the Seattle paper the other day. And he wrote a letter to the editor. And, he was just inspired personally, and reading his letter inspired me. To be aggressive that day. He did something. We all got to do something here. And so I'm not sure that there's a right answer to that question. What he did is as important as anything I'm doing or Joe Biden in some sense is doing. It's an all hands on deck. All of us can help. I do think the states can be profoundly helpful because I do believe we can move the ball faster than Washington, D.C., even though we're going to have a tremendous champion in the White House that I couldn't be more delighted about. And so we can always be ahead of Washington, D.C. because we're more nimble. We can try new things. And the political situation is frankly better in some states than they are in the U.S. Senate. That's just a reality. So we can always be ahead of D.C. and that's a good thing because we always have been ahead of D.C. That's how the changes always come in our nation first in states for civil rights and marriage equality and environmental justice. It's always happened in the states. So we have different but important roles to play.
Well, thank you, Governor Inslee, for joining us. It's been great chatting with you today.
Thank you for talking about this most important issue. I'm convinced that we are going to come out of COVID, and I'm convinced that we've got to keep our eye on the ball throughout COVID against climate change. And when we do, really good things are going to happen in our states and nations. So it's like Winston Churchill said, these are great days. They're dark right now, but the light's coming on climate and COVID. And it's going to be a great day in a few months in our state and our country. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.